So now it's my pleasure to introduce Bill Healy, who has rich experience in emerging markets and technologies, most recently leading Pantera Capital Management, a leading blockchain venture capital manager. Recently, he has turned his focus to cannabis investing and brought to market the first cannabis-related IPO in the U.S., led by a major international investment bank, the Silver Spike Acquisition Corp. And this demonstrates how the space is maturing and evolving. Bill, thanks for joining us. As you're looking at the sector from a broad perspective, can you please share an overview of what you see as the size and scope of the opportunity for everyone?
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate. It's a pleasure to be here, and Mark, thank you for including us as well. I'm really here just to provide a macro backdrop to help frame today's discussion, and I'm going to do that by providing a brief snapshot on the industry, the performance during COVID-19 and the economic slowdown, and try to provide some context. I think these developments may very well expedite the evolution of cannabis as a recognized CPG segment, an industry that's here to stay. I'm going to be deliberately quick, and I'm going to pass through this outline, but we'll of course be happy to take questions and talk about these topics afterwards. So let's go to the first slide on the update on the cannabis industry. So I think here the point one, and these are the 3 points I'd really like to get across, is this may be a bit counterintuitive to those who may not follow the industry closely, but the underpinnings of the cannabis industry are stronger in spite of COVID-19 for reasons on which I'll elaborate. And the second point is not only sales continue to rise in May, proving that sales are not just about all the hoarding people were doing in March, but I think the nature and composition of the sales is evolving in a manner that could have some very long-term positive implications for the industry. Again, an unintended consequence of COVID-19. And the third point here is for prospective investors. You may ask, so what? What's actionable and why does it matter? I think for unencumbered investors like Silver Spike, there are some private actionable investment opportunities today that provide very compelling risk-adjusted returns that are not predicated alone on federal legalization, and I'll address that in a moment. So the next slide. So here on the
and Bill, sorry, it's Mark. If you want to cue me on which slides to put on.
Sure, I'm doing this sequentially. So point one, and I'll rip through this pretty quickly, is the first graph on the tax revenues after the second slide.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. I'll just ask you to switch through it. So for the main point here is, and many people may not appreciate this, but the states are really beginning to generate the cannabis industry, starting to really generate some tax revenues. Almost $2 billion alone last year from just 8 states where legal sales of adult use take place. And just a little perspective, in Colorado, which is a population of 5.5 million people, they've already generated 1.3 billion of cumulative tax revenues. So they go to schools, infrastructures, and things like that. To the next slide, the growth is really continuing. And why is this relevant? And I think this will become more relevant in our discourse about state finances. But here in New York, there's big revenue shortfalls. California is starting to borrow from the federal government just to pay off some of their pension fund debts obligations. So this is important in the backdrop of fiscal finances. The next slide just shows what everybody sort of knows, that social acceptance continues to grow. It's not just the young. Perhaps Chapman, from our operator on our next panel, can talk a little bit about the composition of this customer base, and I think it's pretty interesting. The next slide, with all the green, I think that's really interesting. You don't often see this degree of consensus, but this is really a political reality, and maybe it just shows where the states with recreational marijuana laws, the populace really views this as a success. And I think that's very important. It goes to the heart of why during the crisis, all these dispensaries received these essential service designations by all 11 states. Even Massachusetts backed away from their early close, and they're even supporting it now. They just announced that today. So I think the point that I'm trying to make here really quickly is that the macro underpinnings are stronger when you look at employment, taxes, the political standing. And ironically, it's COVID-19 that sort of brought these developments to force. The next point too, in consumption, and I think this is pretty I should say people are following this, but just a few quick numbers. because there's also some interesting things here. The consumption is not only proving resilient, but the composition and profitability are evolving in really interesting ways. What I mean by that is that you could just see the numbers here. They're quite large. Year-on-year growth is 37% in adult use in the States. And I don't even have CBD here. CBD is about 4 billion projected this year, and projected to go 6 times that by 2025. But one takeaway from the sales, again, is a snapshot of what's going on in the space today. It's no longer hoarding. People are where people thought March was just sort of a unique circumstance. The early May sales figures in Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington, all are exceeding January and February numbers. So that's one thing. And the other thing is the nature and consumption of the sales are evolving as well. In other words, that could really be supportive of long-term growth and profitability. Deliveries are increasing. Again, that was expedited by COVID-19. People are ordering more for delivery. So in California, it's up like 37%. People are when they're ordering from online for deliveries. And higher margin product share is also growing. So things like edibles and other non-flower products that are more profitable are actually taking more market share from the whole pie. The next slide, just those that love data. I just found this is really, really interesting. It's about a track and trace software volume that basically shows that people are using data in 11 of the 13 states in DC. It just shows very, very interesting spikes, over 74% increase over 7 months of the terabytes that are being used in the data for people that are shipping the product and logging it in the system. And just in fact, over the past month, the retail figures are up almost 13% month on month. And don't forget, this is all in the context of US retail sales in the month of April going down 16.4%. So sales are strong. The composition's changing in ways that could be very, very interesting for the industry and seem to be resilient to COVID-19. The last point that I want to focus on, and that is about the investment opportunities that this provides in our view. I think for investors that are looking for high conviction investment themes, that are looking to invest in other particular areas, and looking to invest in essential services, recurring revenue streams, high cash generation, with little dependency on capital markets. I think the private credit and growth opportunities in this space provide a really niche strategy uncorrelated to other markets. And we think that the risk-adjusted returns that you get are very compelling. And I think that there's a distinction I want to make about one other thing that I think is lost on some people, and this goes back to our emerging market experience, and that is not only there's two forms of potential profitability here, or investment gains, alpha as they say. One is just the risk-adjusted return and what you can get for making these types of investments, but don't underestimate the power of institutional money that's behind you. Like in our emerging market experience, we always used to laugh that PIMCO would never want to buy Mexico at 1,200 basis points over, but couldn't get enough at 300 over. To us at Silver Spike, we feel very strongly about this, that as this grows, that this industry grows, the institutional money will come. And I think that's the tidal wave that also, I think, makes us a very compelling space. And the next slide is just a real snapshot of just how cannabis, if you look at the green arrow, the green one on the bottom right-hand corner, it just shows you about tobacco and alcohol, which is just THC, for example. There's no mention of CBD here, but just gives you the context of the sheer scale. The next slide, you're seeing a lot of reports now that, hey, maybe cannabis isn't a consumer staple or just a consumer discretionary. Maybe it's consumer staple. You see here that the beer consumption after the 2008 crisis, people didn't stop drinking beer is the punchline there. And then the last two slides, or I should say 2 more slides here, just give you a context of we find that people don't necessarily appreciate the breadth and scale of how big this market's becoming. 2 more down, the last one with the 2 graphs. People do ask us, I just want to make a quick comment on the public markets. People do ask about the public markets and should we buy here instead of doing maybe something, private. And I think that the point is that COVID had its moment before COVID-19. And I think if you look at the next and last slide, when he talks to public valuations, I think you're seeing the last gasps here of a legacy industry characteristics that are playing out. There was a lot of significant public markets capital that was raised at unsustainable multiples. I think you're seeing capital was deployed in very capital intensive MSOs, multi-state operating models. Operating structures were inefficient. Management teams either had limited operating experience or financial experience. And I think that for us, it's a sort of a long-winded way of saying that the public markets will provide an opportunity, but to the extent that you look at some of the multiples at which some of these names are trading at today that still have material CapEx commitments, large administrative overheads to manage multi-state operating models, and pretty strong revenue predictions as well, it leads us to make a real distinction that, we think there's other opportunities in private credit and then one-off capitalization opportunities as well. And one of those names is represented in today's panel. Full disclosure, Silver Spike Capital is working with Silver Peak to raise recapitalization funds for them. We don't want to talk about the details in that, but thought inviting them to today's panel gave everyone a real live example of a real live breathing, very successful and profitable cash flowing single state operator. So hopefully those are the 3 points that you take away from this. If you take away just one point on the big macro context, that, counterintuitively or not, actually the industry, the macro underpinnings are in fact getting stronger in the face of COVID-19. So that wraps up my hopefully somewhat helpful snapshot of the industry.